Hello and welcome to TheHagwon After Hours. Once again, I'm joined, as usual, by SAT teacher extraordinaire Deanna Park. Hello.
Hello.
How do you like the mid-October weather?
Yeah, it's actually really nice here
Yeah?
in Korea.
It's about 20 Celsius, 68 Fahrenheit.
Right. I have no idea if you tell me in Celsius.
Sweater weather.
We're not gonna talk about that today.
It's like a nice
Yeah.
1-2 layer-ish.
Sure.
But today, we have a very special guest lined up to talk and give his insight. He's been a high school educator for over 30 years, doing high school college counseling, as well as being a coach and an educator for renowned international schools all over Asia. During his time, he's worked with, guided, counseled for, and probably sent thousands of kids to college across the world. He's now a founder of his own company, Myong and Associates Educational Consulting, and here to provide some of his cosmic, vast wisdom and insight on the college application process. It's welcome to the show, Joon Myong. Hello.
Hi, Mr. Myong.
Thank you for inviting me. This is my honor to be here.
Well, on this episode, we're going to talk about what a college counselor is. I mean, you probably have you do have one if you're in high school, but you might not be all too familiar with what their role in your college journey is. We'll talk about that, what they can do for you, what they maybe should do for you. We'll also poke into, we'll call him Mr. Myong, Mr. Myong's vast experience, his decades of experience, to try and give you a little bit of an insider's perspective on what the college application process and maybe the components of it itself. We'll talk about some specific pieces of advice that he might have for students and maybe some memorable ones he's worked with in the past. And we'll wrap up with a discussion about college admissions consultants and who they might benefit most. So for all that and more, this episode of TheHagwon After Hours. Well, I think a lot of our viewers might have a high school counselor if they're in high school right now. They might not know exactly who they are even or what they do. You've been one for decades. So in your eyes, what is a high school college counselor?
Well, I think if you say college, it's something very specific. But as a high school counselor, I think the main, in my mind, the main purpose of a high school counselor was to be sort of the advocate for the student, right? So if a student gets in trouble with a teacher or the admin, it's usually the counselor that steps in to say, well, do we have to go that far, right? In terms of discipline or other things. And then at the same time, we're also the ones that they assign you to if you do get in major trouble so that you can talk things out. And so that's what we do. We also are the ones that sort of are in between. Like we're not teachers, but we're not administrators. We're not friends, but we're not your parent. So we are just a tweener, basically. And that's how teachers see us as well. Are you admin or are you teacher? Well, we're sort of neither. We play both roles at different times. And so that's what counselors do. What I really enjoyed doing ultimately was just working with kids and talking through things that they were struggling with, whether it was academics or family or other social emotional issues. And of course, college counseling was part of it, which I really did enjoy that part of it as well, because I am more of a logical, sequential type of a person, and to have a process in place instead of kids just popping by and then when they're done with me, then they're done with me. No, they're not done with me until they graduate, and hopefully they get into college of their dreams kind of thing. And so there was a process that is sort of, I guess, in place and that we followed.
You've done the job for now like 2 decades plus. You obviously enjoyed it. What were your favorite parts of it? What was day-to-day like? Maybe your least favorite parts? Because I assume it's tough dealing with students year in, year out, probably when they're the most stressed, the most tired.
Yeah. I think there's, hands down, the best part was just dealing with kids on a daily basis. I think all the years that I've worked as a counselor, I've always had an open door policy. So if you come in and you have an issue, we talk about it. If you want to come celebrate something with me, we talk about it. So those drop-ins, just free drop-ins without an appointment, those were the ones that I really enjoyed the most. And so I think there were certain years where there were just floods of kids coming in just constantly. And some just lived in my office, on the office space, and those kinds of things. And that's what I really enjoyed, where we can just talk about life without having to, without pressure of having to do something, which is something that I miss right now that I'm out of school for the first time in over 32 years now, first time. And it is kind of lonely in that way because that's what I miss the most.
What was your least favorite
Least favorite, I'll say.
that you can talk about?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think the least favorite thing, probably just the first thing that comes to my mind is college letters, the recommendation letters. It's tedious. At the same time, I'll also say that was one of my favorite things when I was done with it, because I learned so much about the kids in the process of writing it. And then by the time I finished writing one, and then I see that same kid the next day, that kid usually had a halo. I could see a halo over their heads. I just saw them like angels because that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to see the best parts of them, trying to express that in words. And I always felt like at the end of it, that it was a process that I went through. And I got closer to the kids, even though I wasn't talking to them as I was writing it. But I really, in the end, I enjoyed the final product. The process, oh my gosh, it's terrible. It's like each letter is like 2 hours, and if I have to write 40 of them, I have 80 hours. When am I gonna? I can't do it during the office hours, so I used to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, write 1 or 2 in the morning, go to the office, and then do it at night, and I have to do that for a month.
So I actually want to start here then,
Yeah.
maybe. The college counselor recommendation letter. I think a lot of students might not know if they're sophomores or juniors at this point that your counselor does send a letter. So in the college app as a whole, what role kind of does this letter play? And I think a lot of students might be a little happy to hear that, oh, well, I can just drop in and try to create this kind of connection. Because I think that might be the hardest part for some students. This guy or this girl or this person who doesn't know me at all has to write a letter about me. That's one of the components of the thing I'm saying to college. How can I help facilitate that? Make you think good of me?
Yeah, well, the first part of the question was how significant it is. It's pretty significant, I would say. Probably if we compare it to the teacher recommendations, I would say the counselor recommendation is the most significant by far. One of the main reasons is that it's a consistent one person that's writing for at least so foreign it would be like half, or at YSS it would be half. Singapore American it would be like 1/6, but whatever it was that they ended up. It's a consistent voice that's talking about those various kids, and because we do it year after year after year after year, the admissions people already know how we write, and when we express a certain way about a certain kid, they kind of get a feel for, oh, that's the kind of kid she is, and they make decisions based upon it. And so the reason it took so long was because I could never copy and paste, because I knew the same schools, which obviously we all know that, especially Korean students, they all apply to the same schools, and so which means that they see the same letters from the same counselor. So copy and paste is not possible. And as soon as I'm caught with one, then all of my other letters become illegitimate almost, and so I have to be really careful about that. At the same time, it is something that they do count on quite a bit. So yes, it's important. How important in terms of exact percentage, I have no idea. It's so subtle, it's so subjective, it's hard to say. But I can say that just last year, there was a kid who got into a specific school in the Ivy Leagues, and apparently they give out grades for each of the components of their applications. And for one of them, I'm proud to say that I got a 5 out of 5 as a college counselor letter. And he got in to the school that I didn't think he actually would get in.
So you're saying that the significance of the counselor letter is more like an objective benchmark to look at a student with.
Right. So instead of having very many subjective, different teachers with different perspectives and different writing styles talking about the different kids, so it's like comparing apples to oranges. When you have one person writing over for 40 kids, and they have 3, 4, 5 kids applying to that same school, then they could almost kind of. So I have to be really careful about how I
word things.
things for sure. And then the other part of your question, which was like, okay, well, how do you get to know them? Well, I don't know. I don't know about other counselors. I know for me, just because maybe I've done it for so long, sometimes if I have 1 2-minute conversation with a kid, I get a feel for the kid. I could probably start writing something as soon as I have their resume, and then that 2-minute interaction. Obviously, I want more than that. But I'll say that the best letters are the ones that I've written for that I've written are for kids who really struggled with certain things in their lives and during high school or whatever. And I saw them and I experienced it with them, and then I saw how they grew from it, and then how they dealt with it. It becomes so much more personal and deeper, as opposed to a kid who just drops by just to say, Mr. Myong, can you do this for me? Okay, then it's very transactional. There's nothing that's going on that we're actually sharing anything. Then my letter probably, I would struggle to find anything in depth or narratives that would actually be helpful for the application itself. So I think it is important if they can, I don't know, some students have a harder time going into, cold calling an adult and saying, all right, can I talk to you about, even though they don't have anything to talk about. But if they can, I think it helps a lot. I think to be able to have a relationship with the person that's going to write something very personal about, because teachers write about what teachers see in their classrooms. That's what they're supposed to be talking about, just academics. Counselors basically take care of everything else. So, well, do they know you're everything else? If they don't, then what are they going to write about? Something to think about.
You talked about academics a little bit. Let's pivot to that as part of the college application as a whole. Obviously, a big part of that is the GPA, the transcript, the courses. Every student will want to take certain courses, has to take certain classes. But I think from a college counselor's perspective, especially nowadays where majors are a lot more important, I'd say maybe than in the past, what would you say for a student that has to take some courses? What are some non-negotiables, maybe for certain majors, certain directions?
Yeah, I would say that they're really, I know this is a common question that kids and parents ask, and I don't think there are any non-negotiables, honestly. Unless you're applying to the UK and you're taking IB courses or AP courses and you're trying to do pre-med, well, you better have chemistry and bio. Those are non-negotiables. But a lot of even in the UK, even though it's very much major, or they call it course driven, they don't have specific requirements per se. In the US, for sure there isn't. Even though we say, okay, well, if I want to apply for engineering, should I have the highest math possible? Yeah, that would help. But I've had kids who finish at Algebra 2 get into colleges of engineering, and they get an engineering degree at the end. So it's not, I don't think that's a non-negotiable either. Is it a good idea to have the highest math possible in physics? Yeah. If you want to go to a competitive school, then you probably need it in order to really be considered. So in that way, yes. But let's see, what else? I guess if you are taking, art or something, art and design, then you probably should be taking art and design courses. Although I've had kids who never took an art class in high school, yet they went to art schools because they did it all at TheHagwon or wherever else. So it's really, I don't see it as, especially in the U.S., as anything that you have to take. I always say you should take what you want to take. If you really enjoy it, take it. If you're going to struggle with it, but still you're going to enjoy it, you should take it. I know there's a question that's coming up with it. Right. Go ahead.
No, but so is it, what you're saying is it's not that you have to have things on your transcript as a subject you've took in high school, but if you are aspiring to be that major or intending to study a certain area in college, you should be displaying to some degree interest in that area on some level somewhere else on your application, whether it's like extracurriculars, how you spend your personal time. Like, is that a non-negotiable?
Yes and no in some ways, because I guess if you go and apply for the College of Engineering, that's to me that's a separate thing, right? For College of Engineering, because you're going in as an engineer and it's pretty competitive to get in, there's going to be things that they probably would want to see. And chances are, if you're really that interested, you would have taken it. And if you didn't, then it's like, okay, how do you answer for yourself? At the same time, they also say that kids change majors all the time. Right? I think the statistic that I used to quote, I'm not sure how accurate it is anymore, is that 80% of the kids, before they graduate, they change their majors twice. 80%. So what that means is that not very many of the schools are considering what major a student is choosing to put on their application, if they choose to. Some say undecided. That chances are they won't finish it. So it doesn't really matter. and so they don't use that as any sort of criteria for admission. I think they just sometimes ask the question to be polite and also to have a idea of like how many STEM and how many humanities kids that there are, just in general as to start, so that they have no like imbalance of those.
You mentioned it at the end of your last answer. I'm going to shift a little bit into a question of rigor, the difficulty of classes. You want to take a course that you haven't really taken, I don't know, like calc.
Yeah.
You're probably, you know, you have a feeling you're not going to do all so well, but you're interested in it. You say take it. Reason being,
Yeah, I think whatever you enjoy is probably where you should sort of focus your things on. I think as soon as you say I'm going to do this for my resume, I'm going to do this for any other reason other than some sort of innate kind of want or desire or passion for something, I don't think it turns out well. That's my personal belief. I know there are kids who are plenty disciplined that they'll be able to do anything that you say because they're so motivated to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve. At the same time, like I guess there's a degree to which it has to, you have to make a choice. Sometimes you have to be wise about the way you make those choices. So if you love something and you take it because you love it and you get a D, that's a problem. That's going to cause a problem that you will have to deal with at some point. You can't ignore it. Yeah, but how about should I take the other one so that I can get that easy A plus? Should I take the one that I really want to take, but I know I'm going to struggle with it and I get a B minus? That's the tougher question. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I think it's just a matter of preference. Ultimately, for schools, they do want to see rigor. But I know as soon as I say it that everybody's going to take the maximum, right? Instead of taking 3 higher levels, they want to take 4 and 5 if they can, which hopefully schools don't allow that. Or AP at YSS, it's 8 is the maximum, but they want to take 10, 11, 12, right? But I'll say that I have had kids who get into Ivy League schools with 6, not 8. I've had many kids who went to Ivy League schools and Caltech and things like that without an IB diploma. They didn't even take one, and yet they still got it from SFS. So, yeah.
very much case to case.
It's very much case to case, and to me, like if you don't enjoy what you're doing, then one, you're not going to learn that much. You probably won't do that well. I think the best way to choose is desire.
There's also probably a self-discovery element in that as well.
For sure.
Well, that's the one hard stat. There is the other hard stat, which is standardized testing. That's kind of what we specialize in, and I'm sure that you get this question a lot. On myongconsulting.com, that's MYONG consulting.com, you generously provide a free college application guidebook. But I noticed that it started in the second semester of junior year, and that's where you kind of list maybe take one standardized test or take one at least by this time.
Yeah.
Is that kind of your timeline for last possible first attempt, or what's kind of your ideal SAT, ACT timeline that you have envisioned in your mind from your
Yeah, I
experience?
mean, I think I might be outdated in this, but I've always been told by College Board, and at least what I know is that that whole SAT testing is designed for second semester junior year. And I know, especially here in Korea, they start to take it in their freshman year and sophomore year and try to get it out of the way. Unfortunately, it almost never seems to happen. Once in a while, it happens, where they take it one time in their sophomore year and they get their 1590 or 1600. So they're like, we're done. Great. If that can be done, that would be amazing. Then they could focus on IB and as they get full into it in 11th and 12th grade and without having to worry about another standardized test that they have to worry about. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. Vast majority of the kids that I've worked with is like, okay, I want to get it out of the way in sophomore year. I didn't get the score I needed, so I'm doing it again. I'm preparing again. I'm going TheHagwon again. So they take it 3, 4, 5 times. That's an issue. So when's the best time? I think the best time is whenever you think you're most ready, and hopefully, having done 2.5 years of math and 2.5 years of English and 2.5 years of whatever else that was going on in school, you've learned enough that you have the fundamentals to be able to handle whatever materials that are there in the SATs. You spend a few weeks preparing for it, not studying for it. You're preparing for it. You kind of learn how to do certain things. That's what you guys provide, those kinds of tips, a little bit of I guess, practice, and then take it. And ideally, take it one time, get the highest score possible, done. That would be ideal. How many times does that happen? Not very.
Not very often. One thing I would add to that conversation, I think that used to work really nicely when we had the January SAT. So when we had the January SAT, you could be a junior, second semester, you had winter break to do like good 3 weeks of studying, and then fresh out the beginning of the semester, you could sit a January exam, see how that go, maybe take one more that second semester, and then you could be done. And that would be ideal. That is how a lot of people used to take it. Unfortunately, we don't have the January SAT anymore. You have the option of taking the December or the March. What we have seen is a lot of students have started to migrate towards the December exam just because March, second semester, junior year is a really rough time. We've all been there. You've seen many, many rounds of that. And whether you're doing IB or AP, that's a bad time for you. That's a bad time. So a lot of students have instead started taking the December or maybe even the October SAT. October, November, December, we have an exam. That would be not a bad first test to sit. I also agree that I don't think if you're a freshman, even if you're a very high achieving sophomore, it's really not a good idea to be sitting SAT exams. For two reasons, like Mr. Young said. One, if you start sitting exams like 9th or 10th grade, you get the impression that you can sit many, many more exams. And we've talked about this before, but that is never a good idea. If you start studying for the SAT, I want you to be done, like take your last test maximum 6 to 8 months from today. Like if today's the first day you start studying, 6 months, you should be done. That's like including taking it 2 to 3 times. If anything more than that, you're just giving your money away to College Board at that point because you're not going to be more motivated to study. You're not putting in more effort. So that's just a bad idea. And also, there's a lot of learning at school you have to do. A lot of the basic learning, like Mr. May said, you have to take math, English at school, get the basics in to get ready to study for the SAT. So, make sure, I definitely agree. Make sure you're hitting those marks, but I think more realistically, fall of junior year nowadays is probably a good first exam to take. Yeah, just with a different schedule.
I'm sure you've seen many tragic stories of people taking it 5, 6 times. Or
Yeah.
they'll ask you, should I retake to get 20 more points?
Yeah. If they're going to do that, might as well take ACTs. Right. I think there's a I guess advantage to doing ACTs because the score report doesn't come all together. Unfortunately, the College Board has all of them all together, which means that they can see, because that's what they want. Most universities that are competitive, they want to see all your test scores. Well, if you show them that you've taken it 6 times, they're wondering like, okay,
Not a good look.
You've spent half your life taking an SAT, and look at the result, right? Even if it's good, like, okay, was it worth it? No, wasn't worth it. So 3 times is maximum is what I always say. I know kids do more than that these days, but I just don't think that's a good idea. If you can plan a bit early and do it 3 times, and the third time, hopefully you don't have to do a third time. If it's a third time, that's it. That's your last time. Get your highest score as possible. Then it'll be good. And still, I think the COVID, had some, had an impact on that. Obviously, a lot of the schools pretty much all the schools went test optional, right, for a couple of seasons, couple of rounds. Now they're starting to come back, unfortunately. So now it's going to become a little bit more of a factor, but still at this point, I'll say that there are plenty of schools that are test optional. So it's not as important as it used to be.
Now going into what we'd call the soft factors, you mentioned a little bit about how if you're doing an extracurricular or a club for your resume, probably not a good idea. Well, then what are the kind of reasons that you would take an extracurricular, or how do they play a role in your college application? Because I think a lot of people are surprised when they open the Common App or the UC app for the first time. There's a whole section you need to fill out. You need to talk about the hours. You need to somehow write about all your responsibilities and all of what you did in this concise 50-word prompt. What do you think about extracurriculars?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to do. But again, if you're doing it for resume purposes, then it's probably the wrong thing to do, I'll say. That said, universities are looking for students that will be active on their campus when they come to them. So they're looking for people who are not going to sit on their hands, do nothing, or sleep, never get out, come out of their dorm room. They want somebody who's going to be active, who's going to be leaders, who's going to be movers and shakers, or athletes, or musicians, or whatever. If you're really interested, right, go volunteer, do something, and make it something that's worthwhile for yourself. And chances are it means so much to you that when you have that one opportunity to write about something in your supplemental essay, you'll write about it. And it'll be all over your application. Is that something that means something to you, that's deeper, that they know, that they confirm that this is real? Yeah, they know it. College admissions people are not idiots. It is sometimes amazing. Like, I've had discussions with college admissions people. I remember the first one, like the first couple of years, on the job, it was with Wellesley. And they were, focusing on these three girls while I was at SFS. And it was she, the admissions person was talking about these three girls as if, they're calling them by their first names, talking about them as if they knew, she knew them all their lives. Like, it was amazing. Like, oh, okay, we're talking about the same kid, and like, the fact is, like, all they have is a few pieces of paper. How do they know all that? They know all that.
They're able to read between the lines.
Yeah. They've done it so much. They've been doing it so long. They've read how many applications, and they do it in 7 minutes. Right? They get a feel for it. If they want them, there's something attractive about them. They can talk about it. And it's not just that. I mean, I've had many other conversations since where, yeah, it is amazing. So don't think, okay, just put that in and they'll be impressed, and that'll get you in. No. All right. But that said, should you do an extracurricular activity? Yes. Should you do many so that you can put many on? There are kids there's some amazing lists, right? Is it possible for them to do all those things? There's no way. There's only 24 hours in a day. So what is it that they're doing? Well, it's just a laundry list of things that maybe they signed up for, maybe they were sort of interested at some point, I don't know. But they have it. Is that what they want? No. But is it just one thing? Well, one thing would be a little bit limited, although if that one thing is a sport. So, for example, I just had a student who went to another Ivy League school, and she was a swimmer. And that's all she did. But she didn't get recruited. She wasn't good, ultimately she gave up on it. But I don't know if you've ever, swam competitively. It's just morning, night, weekends, 6-7 days a week. Like, is there any time to do anything else at school? No. So that was her only. She had a couple other little things, but not worth talking about.
And the people in admissions know this.
Yeah,
They've seen so many applications. They've talked to so many high schools. They know that.
So she doesn't have any time. They know that she doesn't have any time for anything else. So are they okay with that? Absolutely. And what does she write about? Swimming. So you would think, like, well, she's not an athlete, a recruited athlete. Like, she shouldn't just talk about swimming. But through swimming, she talked about some other aspects of her life. She got into the school of her dreams.
I have a quick question, because it's when we talk about extracurriculars, it's really easy for students who have something they're passionate about or at least interested in, and for them to find like a genuine high school way to interact in that area, whether it's through clubs at school or volunteering on their own time or doing kind of personal projects. It's really the students who don't have a particular area of interest that we're asking this question for.
Yeah.
So if we imagine you're back in your office at a school and you have we're looking at maybe like a sophomore or an underclassman who's kind of walking by and coming in and saying, like, I want to get interested, like, part of a community. I want to get involved. I want to do something, but I don't have anything that's like really pulling me towards anything specific. What is your advice to have them navigate kind of extracurriculars either on campus or off campus to kind of help them discover what it is they want to put their time and effort into?
Yeah. If it's freshmen, I know exactly what, I say the same thing all the time with freshmen. It's just sign up for everything. Try out for every team. Just like, you don't even know what you're good at yet. So just go ahead and try. And then, by second semester, you probably figure it out. Like either you get cut or you're not, it's not much fun and you start dropping stuff, but hold on to the ones that you think that has potential and then keep going and see if you can become president by the end of it, right? That's one. Sometimes they come in a bit too late. Maybe it's, end of their sophomore year and they feel like, okay, I haven't done anything. Well, is there anything that they do on their own, right? It's personal projects. It can be an extracurricular activity. I've seen that happen where it becomes something bigger, right? And it's just because it can't be, verified by a school official doesn't mean it doesn't exist. If you've spent that much time doing it because you love doing it, you've done it, right? And you can probably write about it, and that might be enough. That could be enough. But it is an issue for kids who really, we've had kids where they don't do anything. They don't feel like doing anything. They don't want to be part of the school community. They don't want to be part of any community. They just want to play video games. Well, video games, there are esports teams all over the place, especially on the West Coast. That's a possibility. So whenever they say, I play a lot of video games, I'm like, are you good? Right, that's the first question I ask. And if they say, yeah, I'm like the best, like, okay, well, let's look into, right? But most kids don't say that. Then, I'll have to kind of say, all right, have you looked into other things? If you're, interested in gaming, maybe in coding, have you learned, go take a course in coding on your own. There's so many courses that you can take just online, Coursera, whatever, MIT courses that they offer for free. Those are things that they can put on their resume at the end of it, even if it had nothing to do with school or, unrelated to anything.
And what do you think about those like shiny name extracurriculars that people talk about, parents talk about? MUN,
Debate
student
team.
council, debate team, the engineering STEM club, whatever it is.
Yeah, those are things that, again, if they're really into it and they're good at it and they really are passionate about it, well, of course they should. Why not? But are they doing it just for that, for the name, for the shiny? Is it shiny? I didn't realize it was shiny. I never thought that was cool, but I guess there are people who think it's cool. I always think sports is the only cool thing, but
We're not all equally blessed in that department.
Some of us didn't have an
have to
option.
make do
Some of us
with
didn't have an
other
option.
things.
We went into theater.
They
Like,
both,
being
June
a lead
and I
would be
are
cool.
examples of people who are not blessed in that area. We had to make do otherwise.
But I used to call parents in just to, especially if they have a kid that just is not motivated to do anything, to say, yeah, this is where you might want to just step up and see if you can pay for a lesson here or do, take them to TheHagwon or, voice lessons or whatever, right? Just sometimes you have to invest and you have to put some pressure on certain kids so that they start moving. So there's a little momentum one way or the other. There are kids who are just truly without momentum. They just sit.
And I assume that having a history, a couple of years, leadership roles and experience, that speaks more volumes than simply being a member.
Yeah, that would be helpful. The problem is that not everybody can be president or vice president, but there are usually, fortunately, a lot of clubs, and so you can be like leadership in something. But even if you aren't, if you still are so motivated and passionate about the cause or whatever it is that they're doing, and you do it because you love doing it, chances are you are a leader even though you might not have the position of one. And if you can talk about it in your essay or somebody else talks about it in their recommendation letter as if they are like a leader, it's just as powerful.
I think something a lot of students think about, especially given that high school, college applications are increasing year after year after year, there's so many qualified applicants, is how to be distinctive. And I think sometimes they think about it in their transcript. Maybe I'm a STEM guy, but I'm going to take a weird course somewhere else because it makes me distinct. In extracurriculars, do you think that it's better to have all your clubs kind of in the same basket to show that, or do you want to be diverse?
I don't think it matters. I think if you are, let's say, computer science is probably the most competitive. We talked about majors not making a difference. For engineering and computer science, it does somewhat make a difference. And computer science is especially competitive. And if you want to get into a specific, top level computer science program, then I don't think diversity is what they're looking for. What they're looking for are singularly focused, creative in their own right, as well as being brilliant in that specific area is sometimes what they're looking for. But that's very computer science specific, I'd say. Everything else, honestly, it's still the same. Whatever you love, right?
It could be one thing, it could be 100 things.
Yeah, it could be 100 things, yeah. I mean, you don't have time for 100 things, but I think that's, yeah, whatever. If you, I mean, I've had kids who are that energetic, right? They make 27 hours a day somehow happen, and they can make all kinds of things happen, and they have gazillion things that it's like there's no way. But then you talk to every single leader of that particular club or activity, they're like, yeah, she's there for every one of them, right? Well, then more power to her, but usually it doesn't happen that way.
I'm still stuck on the computer science thing because I'm remembering back to my time in college when I was meeting these 10x programmers and they just destroy me in every single aspect of computer science. Anyways, I think something that students might also struggle with quite a bit is recommendation letters. A big part, you talked about the counselor letter, but there's also teacher letters, probably one or two of them. Who to ask and how?
Yeah. Information it could be helpful. If you know a teacher or two that you may have in 11th or 12th grades, it's usually there, that are known to be good letter writers, it's helpful to ask.
Word spreads.
Yeah, for sure. And, most kids probably know, parents would know, certain teachers with big mouths would be able to reveal that to you. And that's helpful, one. And then, but really, it's the one that you have a connection with in some way. That's usually the best. It's not necessarily that you're the best in that class, but somebody, if you know that you've made the effort and you're always active and participating and always engaged in class and focused, and you're known as somebody who doesn't go and beg for points so that you can get that A plus as opposed to an A. So you have a reputation of being a learner or a pure student. Then those are the kinds of people that you would want to approach. And how do you approach them? You approach them personally. You don't approach them by email or by phone. You go to them personally and ask, because it's a big favor. They don't have to do it. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen a job description where college recommendation was part of it. But it's an expectation, of course, but they can always say no. Because I think most schools, what they ask is, if you can't write a strong letter recommendation, just say no. So what have you done in the class? And so hopefully, chances are it's probably a class where you enjoy. Either you enjoy the teacher or the topic, or hopefully both. That would be the best.
Stop me if you've heard this before. I have one letter already lined down. I'm going to humanities. It's my English teacher. I have a second letter. I have a history teacher. I kind of like him. I've done okay in his class. But I have this band teacher that loves me. We worked for 8 years. But they're not really an academic writer. Who do I choose?
Yeah, you can't do the band teacher. It's useless.
So academic in nature, and that kind of serves as the role of the letters. And then maybe you can ask your counselor to talk to your band teacher to get some of the character descriptions.
Potentially, if there are teachers that have come to me and said, like, I know that kid didn't ask me, but can I write one as a third optional? I mean, if teachers are coming to me to volunteer it, then I'll take it. Yeah, but of course, not all schools take the third. Some do, and so whenever they do, and I have that available, I'll use that. But no, that is an extra. It should be 2 academic teachers, usually one from humanities, one from STEM. That's usually the best, because I think all schools want to see that you are able to sort of use both sides of your brain, that you're well-rounded. And there are certain schools that actually require from 2 different areas.
Well, that's the essays that teachers write. Well, the essays that students write. You've probably seen a lot of students stress over this part. I see a lot of students who they stress so much over their standardized testing, and then when they're done and they're writing their essays and they're struggling with their essays, I wish I could just take the SAT again instead of having to write about myself. What advice do you have for students there, and how can a high school counselor help with writing your supplemental essays or your Common App?
Yeah. I say, especially if they're starting to write their write their essays, that means that pretty much they've gone through 6 semesters of school. So, and the majority of them are applying early, which means that that's it. Their grades are done. They can't do anything more. Chances are by that time, their SAT scores, ACT scores are pretty much done. as far as like maybe except for being captain or president, their extracurricular kind of profile is pretty much done. So what do they have control over at that point in the summer of their senior year or first semester of their senior year? What do they have control over? One thing, that's their application. And out of the application, yeah, their activities list and resume and things like that. But ultimately, it's the essay that's the most important, right? Whether it's the Common App essay or the supplemental. Why is it important? Oh, I mean, how important is it? I think at this point, that's probably the most important because everything else is done. It's kind of like, okay, it's filed away. Like now, what can you do? Well, you can write a great essay that represents you the best way possible, or you write a terrible essay. That could be it. That's it. That's make or break. That could be 100%, right, if you think of it that way. So how important is it? It's very important. What is it that what they should write? There's some. The thing is, like I've had so many great writers. They're amazing, right? There's no way I can write the way they do, even though they're in 11th grade. But they're so bad at expressing who they are, talking about themselves. And so the one thing that I used to just harp on all the time, whenever I got a chance, whenever I had an opportunity, whenever I had an audience, was journal. Yeah. In 9th grade, 10th grade, whenever I get a chance, like, do you journal? And if the kids say they journal, chances are they're not going to struggle with it. Right? And what's journaling? It's not diary. Like I know in Korean school, I used to do it. I remember when I was little. 오늘은, I did this, I did this. That's, I don't know, maybe call it diary or ilgi or whatever. But I'm looking at a journal is not that. It's just journal is whenever you feel like you want to write about something because something bad happened or something great happened or something unbelievable happened and you just want to just sort of debrief it to yourself. So you're talking to yourself, but instead of talking to somebody else about like, whatever happened, you're talking to yourself on, just write. And then the more you write about how you felt and what you experienced and what you learned from it, and you get that sort of personal language going, chances are when that time comes, they'll be more prepared. I've had some of my best essays that I've read a couple of years ago while I was in Singapore. My favorite one was a kid who just took excerpts from her journal from like 6th grade, one from 7th grade, one from 9th grade, so like 5 little stories that had a certain theme to it. And she just literally, it was like really bad, 5th grade language. And then, and then you could see it develop. It was amazing. And so she finished that in like 20 minutes.
That'd be great if we could finish essays in 20 minutes.
Well, yeah. I think what we're talking about here is saying, like, your essays are supposed to be testament of the growth you've experienced throughout the 3.5 years that you've had in high school, and also kind of the person you've grown into and maybe who you want to continue to grow into in college. And it's good to kind of make point of the moments that make you feel something deeply, whether there's something positive or negative, and just to have kind of a good blueprint of it to kind of come back to. We see a lot of students who will come in and be like, I'm in this club, I did this activity, I enjoy it so much and it's so important to me. And then you sit them down and you ask them to talk about like one thing that they did or happened, and they struggle to pinpoint a specific incident because what they have is this lasting feeling of like, I did 3 years of this and it was so enjoyable and it's genuine and they really put their time and effort into it. But if you sit them down and they're like, okay, well, now talk about one thing that we can write about that somebody can read that's like, a decent amount of length. And they're like, I don't know. Well, I can talk about like the last 3 years, but like we can't talk about all 3 years. We got to talk about one thing. So it's a really good idea of like real highs and real lows or anything that just makes you feel something in depth. Put it down and, like have a Notion, journal or like a single Google Doc that you can just kind of come in. That's a really good idea. The other question I would ask is lots of students struggle because they think that the application is a place to kind of make themselves like look bigger and better and more grand than they actually are. And so when they're writing, they're struggling like, I have to put like this really good face about myself. But they don't have you're not that person. You don't have the materials to write that essay about yourself. That's not who you are. Yeah. And we have to have a conversation of like, here's a more realistic essay that can still be very meaningful. What is kind of the conversation you have in a context like that with a student?
Yeah, the stress comes from exactly that, right? You said it too, like how do I stand out among these literally tens of thousands of applicants who are probably identical to you in terms of numbers and everything else, all other stats. That's a lot of pressure. How do you, like, if you are the best at something and you just simply are the best, great, like that's easy. How many people are the best? One out of, right. So this is where the kids just, they start to be and write about somebody who they are not. It happens all the time, every time, almost every time. How do you make yourself special? Just be yourself. Do you have a story that's just kind of unique to you and what you learn from it? I don't care what it is that you learn. That a lot of times that the kids struggle with that too, because say, well, I struggled through that and then I learned that, but what I learned is so trivial. No, no one learned it the way you learned it. That's what makes you special. And as soon as you are genuine and honest about what it is that you have experienced and what you've learned, and you say it in a way that makes the reader feel like, oh, I know this kid now. Done. You've succeeded. You've made yourself memorable. You've made yourself special. It's when those kids who obviously do not know how to use that particular word, they use it because it sounds impressive, or they talk about something that they're really passionate about, but they act as if they can read right through it. I know with GPT, I don't know exactly, like maybe it's a little harder now, but I still feel like, no, these people know what they're doing, and if you are being pretentious, you're not being yourself, then they'll not like you. If they don't like you, they won't take you. And it's the people that come, let's say to Seoul, those are usually the first readers of almost every application. So making an impression with them when they are here, whenever, if you can, that's great. But you also know that they are real people right there. You can almost touch, you can touch them, you can talk to them, and those are the people that you're trying to touch. They read, if you're applying to any of those high level schools, they're reading applicants of superstars after superstars after superstars. You're not going to outshine any of them. But you can out-unique them just being yourself. And that's the hardest part, especially for kids who are just used to being the best at school, at your little school. But you know how many schools there are and how many valedictorians there are?
All right.
So those are the parts of the college application, the components. Taking a step back from that, the college list itself. This is a huge thing that I think your first interaction with a counselor, maybe, besides the bigger group meetings, might be to go in one-on-one to talk about a college list you have researched. Yeah. And for a lot of times, at least at the top Asian international schools, I assume it's time where you crush a lot of dreams.
Yeah, unfortunately.
One of the things you do also is you create bespoke lists for your clients. What goes into your thought process of making a list, and also, when students and parents, sometimes just parents, bring in their list of colleges, what's the common feedback that you give?
Yeah, a lot of times, I guess, the biggest issues usually are that they're overreaching, and then I don't have a choice but to bring reality back to them. So sometimes it's brutal. I mean, I try to do it as gently as I can, but I know that no matter what I say, it doesn't sound particularly positive. That said, I don't make any lists. I mean, I have the kids do the research. I have the kids come up with a list on their own. Of course, there are things that I put which they may or may not have thought about, and the types of schools, and maybe I may throw out a certain names of schools so that they understand what kind of schools I'm talking about, right? I sometimes use like U.S. News and World Report. I hate rankings, but just for to bring a school name that they hadn't heard of to the forefront, sometimes using a ranking system that everybody sort of accepts as the Bible, even though it's just stupid. To have it, oh, it's number 12. Oh, it's above Cornell. Oh, there must be a good school, even though they've never heard of it. I'm just planting seeds. So the most important right now is, I guess the easiest approach to do that is just you scare them to death. say these are all very, very competitive, but if there's a certain limit to in your school for the number of applications, okay, you can reach for those, but there's got to be a safety net. That safety net, whether it's 2 or 3 likelies or safeties, whichever word you use, that's something that you really, really need to research, right? Where you have a really, really good chance of getting in, and you will also be very, very proud to go if that's the only school you get into, which is basically an impossibility.
That's a really slim category of schools.
Right? And so I started doing this. I mean, it depends on every year it was a little different, but I used to just say different schools' names in every presentation I ever did in front of students or parents. It didn't matter whether we're talking about college or not. I would just, you know that Beloit is coming, Kalamazoo is coming. Oh yeah, that's a great school. Carlton, Minnesota. I visited. It was amazing. Just plant a few just names there, and then when they come when they hear it again, they're oh yeah, I remember that. And that sometimes that happens over 4 or 5 years. Maybe it becomes an acceptable school now that comes into that list of acceptable schools that they'll pay for. But I mean, this is the problem right now is that the kids don't have any safety schools. And the popular safety schools that used to be when you went to school or when you went to school even now, it's different, right?
So if you had an ideal student who's building their college list, they're very amenable, they're very open, they really just don't know. What should they be looking at in terms of how, if we have the whole list, how many can I really reach? What is a good kind of number of safeties to have that is kind of respectable? When we're talking about safeties, again, we're talking about schools you would actually go to, not just you're scared you're not going to get into any single school. What is the ideal kind of makeup, do you think, for your list?
Yeah, that's a hard one because it is so competitive, and there is no such thing. There used to be, just even 5 years ago, 10 years ago for sure, there was that middle ground where when I say 50-50, it really was 50-50, and chance there was more like 60-40, 70-30. So if you did, let's say 10's the limit, and you go 3-4-3, then you would have at least 6 or 7 that you can choose from at the end of the day. But right now, most of those schools that we used to call 50-50, if you do early decision, you get in. If you do regular, it's a reach.
The ED bump is real.
Yeah, it's a real complicated game now.
Yeah. And then once in a while, a kid who deserves to get in does get in. So it's really, really hard. And so it used to be 3-4-3, or if it was 12, maybe 4-5-3 or something like that. But now I'm going to say that's probably the same, but the yield is going to be different. How many out of if you do 4-5-3 and you have 12, how many would you get in? Maybe 3 or 4. So it's a different sort of a landscape, so that the safety school becomes really, really important.
Right. Safeties are not safeties really.
I mean, those are the ones that those are the only ones you can put money on that you could attend. The rest are just up in the air. Now, if you're a top student, again, then what is a 50-50? What is a reach? To me, it's just it's the same.
Not much changes.
It's maybe almost even harder to pinpoint for top students.
Probably, yeah. I think there's certain kids who would be more targeted for those specific schools that do those, numbers games. And I've seen that happen where kids who are other top kids don't get in, but somebody who's a little bit lower get in. But you can't count on that either. So it is blind leading the blind, honestly. If I wish I had the answers on exactly how to do it. But safeties become that much more important. That's one.
And putting effort into those applications, showing that you care.
Yeah. And then, that's for sure. Right? So we do, I used to force kids to do those safeties at first, right? They have to submit it first. In terms of how I lead them, I mean, I think that's the biggest part of U.S. application process is just there's so many choices. How do you choose? And so if they have friends or family in a specific area, starting from that point and doing that's sort of how I did it with my own son. And even though I've been doing this for a long time, just for my own kid, it's a little bit more pressure for myself. But ultimately, it was like grandparents. Okay, let's drive around within 4-hour radius of it. And that's what we did. We drove like almost 3,000 miles but all within 4, 5, 6 hour radius of Chicago. And so we ended up finding a school that he really liked, and that was it. But without doing that, like, how do I explore the entire continent of the U.S.? It's really, really hard. And so, but unfortunately, there are many families that actually don't have any connections to anywhere, to any specific place in the U.S. So we're east or west or center. That narrows it down. I guess no one says south, although UVA and UNC are pretty popular.
Georgia.
Yeah,
Vanderbilt,
Georgia Tech.
Harvard itself.
Yeah. But so then it's the types of schools, right? And so if they have no idea, then I use those ranking lists, or I just suggest a couple of schools that I really do like for just not that they're paying me. I wish they were. But there are certain schools where I've sent many of my kids to, and it's like 100% customer satisfaction. Okay, so those are the ones that I'll just kind of say out loud and say, look into that. I mean, everybody seems to like it whenever they go.
In your experience, do you also kind of like get the vibe of the student and see like maybe you'll like these schools?
Oh, for sure.
Culture
I mean,
fits.
That I would not suggest, even if it's perfect for somebody else, I would never suggest it for somebody who I don't think would fit necessarily there. And that's more subtle, I suppose. And I guess the more I've done it and the more schools I've visited, I've visited a lot of schools. And it's just part of my professional development. Whenever I travel, I end up going to a school or two, just even if I don't have any specific official purposes for it, just for my own information. And so you get a kind of feel for it. And a lot of times, like if you just drive through, sometimes you just feel the culture of the place. Like the political culture these days is very, very pronounced. Yeah. And
If you care about it, look at how the university administration responded.
Yeah.
That'll give you an idea of maybe the type of place you want to go to? Question mark?
I think a question I have then is if making the list has become this nuanced, is it a good idea, is it helpful and or appropriate for a student to kind of bring in a list early on before beginning of senior year to their counselor and kind of test drive a couple things, get a couple, schools knocked off their list, have some time to kind of like play around with the whole landscape of their list?
Yeah, I mean, when I work with kids, it's second semester, junior year. I mean, that whole semester, I will be giving them like weekly homework assignments to say, okay, why don't you look into these two? And then as they do research and they stumble across another, I think I might like that one. I heard somebody talk about that. Go ahead, do that. And then just compile like basically an Excel sheet or something with pros and cons and things that they felt and things that they may have heard through whatever resources they stumble across, or if they visited, that would be great. Those kinds of things. Like that is something that I focus quite a bit of time on, for
So
sure.
real slow and steady.
Yeah.
One thing I want to touch upon, and I did my research, I listened to the other podcast you were on. You mentioned kind of an underrated source of secondary education for a lot of students, the UK or Europe or other Asian schools maybe. I think we've been very American-centric with our college discussion so far, but if students aren't considering the UK, aren't considering schools outside of the US, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally different, honestly, U.S. University college landscape and the culture is just so very different than anywhere else in the world. It is unique. Now, there are a few places here and there, certain schools in the UK, certain schools in other places that have maybe a dorm, and so they have a living community as well as a learning community. But U.S. pretty much all consistently, you all live in a dorm, and you end up going to school with the person that you're sleeping next to. Okay, that didn't
In the
sound
same
right.
room
In the
as.
same room, assigned to the same room as.
They're neighbors with, right?
Sure.
Both things can be true.
Right.
And I think that in itself is unique, and because of it, it's so important that you find the right community. Because if you're not happy because you're a misfit, you don't, you're the odd one out, you're the wangta. It's really difficult to be successful in school. You can't focus on the other stuff. So compared to that, let's say you have somebody who doesn't want that, doesn't need that. They don't need that sort of the wall around the campus because they're so independent. And I don't know if you've ever had like European friends, who are teenagers. They're different, most of them. Like I don't want to stereotype, too much, but my experience with like German kids or Dutch kids, they're young adults, like when they're 12, and that's the way the parents raise them, and so. They're like, okay, well, you go to university. Well, I might just take a gap year, work a little bit, and just go. And then, or if they go, they're like, all right, I'm gonna go, get a flat, and I'll do my own cooking and wash. They don't have any issues with that. You take a Korean kid or most American kids, like that would be a foreign concept altogether. But that's the kind of, if you have that sort of a personality, and secondly, if you know what you want to do, you know exactly what you want to do. You're not going to flip-flop on majors and what you want to study.
You're not going to be that 80% that switches two
Exactly.
times.
If you can be that 20%, know exactly what you want to do, and you're gonna go follow through with it, then UK is a great option, because you can be independent, because you're going to most likely be living in a flat on your own. That's what you wanted. You didn't want to share bathrooms and whatever.
Right.
It could be a nightmare.
Go to parties in the RA room or
Yeah. And then two, if you hated math and you take a course in, political science, then you will never take a course in math, because you'll all be doing political science from day one, and you'll be done in 3 years. Right? So it is an option for those kinds of kids. That said, like coming from most of the international schools here, I guess if you're going from Dulwich, maybe it's a little different, right? If it's a very British school. But most of the other schools, I think the way they teach, the way they do school is sort of more American. And so where would you have to adjust least at? Probably at an American university or college. So, but, every year there are kids who do go to UK. That's my experience.
Also, one thing, the essays are much more straightforward.
This is true. For those kids who don't like to write essays, personal statement is a lot more straightforward. It's very much more professional, and it is in many ways easier to write.
So you have to be qualified in a different way than U.S. schools. So it's really, we're talking about a fit issue here. If you have to be a right candidate for a UK school for a very specific course of study.
And also the prediction of admission. It's a lot easier to predict in the UK. Not 100%, but pretty close to it. If you have the qualification, whatever it says, and you meet it, chances are you're going to get in.
I want to pivot a little bit. So you've been doing this job for a long time. You've seen a lot of students. At a certain point, I assume you kind of see, like in a video game, like archetypes and types of students, types of, maybe not even types of students, but types of issues and types of situations that you come upon year after year after year, and you have to give advice upon. I'm thinking of like some typical high school profiles, maybe some cases. And so I'm going to present one of these. And tell me first if I'm right in that this is an issue, and then what kind of advice you would give, or what kind of situations. Maybe you might dip into that bag of stories to show how these students maybe address that problem, and then, or not even a problem, but address the situation and how they went to college. So maybe the first one might be what we would maybe call a traditional splitter, where their GPA is not that great. Maybe they had a rough start to their high school career, but they worked hard. They have a good standardized test score. To go into college, that GPA is going to be an issue. They can't bring it back up. Just not enough time. Just numbers don't work out. But they're serious about going to college. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think if you had to have a split, that would be the worst split than the other way. But I've seen kids who obviously are smart enough to score well, and then they can express themselves well enough on an essay, and maybe they have a reasonable explanation for their poor performance up until that point, or some profound thing that they could talk about. I've seen it work out. I think the first thing that comes to mind, when I previewed your question before, was a kid who had all sorts of issues. I mean, I was just like praying most of the time that he would survive, like live to graduate from high school. He ended up, but his SAT score, he's a like white kid, so he never went to Hagwon, but he got like 15 something, whatever. Or at that time was it 20? No, it was like 15 something. And so obviously a smart kid. You have a conversation with him, like he's brilliant. Like he just knew things. So I knew he was brilliant. So I tried to express that he is brilliant. Just his transcript just doesn't show it because he just won't do homework. He will not study. He doesn't care. So it's like 2 point whatever it was. But he ended up getting into a top liberal arts college, and they took a chance on him. I don't think he graduated, but they took a chance on him. So we have something like that. We've had just even more recently, certain schools that seem to be willing to take chances on kids like that, where they haven't shown the discipline in high school, but they want to give them a shot. So there are certain schools that have that sort of a reputation.
And you express maybe your newfound maturity or your maturity through essays and through letters.
Yeah, yeah. And the more recent kids, they were both brilliant writers. I mean, so they were obviously smart enough in every other way. It's just school was not their thing.
They really showed that they could excel maybe in a different setting, different situation.
Yeah, it doesn't always work out that way usually. I mean, they really have to aim much lower and just kind of but as long as they graduate from high school anywhere in any international school here in Korea, they'll get into university.
And maybe think about transferring after.
Yeah. Or, I mean, it doesn't actually matter. Even if it's an accredited school, it's a good school.
Yeah.
Because if you can be the top of the class there, you'll probably go to Harvard Law if you want to.
I've realized this after doing grad school admission. It's like you have to do well in college.
Well, wherever you end up.
Yeah, wherever you end up.
You don't have to end up at the top university.
Yeah, no. And if you go to a top school and you have a 2.7 GPA, good luck going into anything further.
Yeah.
I mean, getting a job is a problem. Going to graduate school, forget about it.
Yeah.
I mean, top graduate school.
Right. Well, so it's more question of we're coming to the conversation of fit again, really, and now I'm kind of blanking because we did a little circle and a turn.
Well, I was going to talk about the
Opposite.
other way.
Right.
The reverse splitter.
Yeah.
High GPA,
Yeah.
test scores didn't come out as I wanted to. Maybe they are to like 5, 6
Yeah.
test attempts.
Right. And that was really, for the kids like that, it was really a blessing in disguise, the whole COVID situation where tests were optional. And so if they had high GPA, but they just can't score on, there's some like that. There aren't very many like that, but there are some like that. And unfortunately for those kids, they really suffered through, because they feel like, okay, I don't quite measure up, so I can't apply to those schools. Well, during COVID, it didn't have to do it. And I know parents were always worried about at that point, and even now, right? Even though they say they're test optional, what does that mean? Like, are they really test optional? Are they really not looking at it if you don't turn it in? No, they don't look at it if they don't turn it in. So if they accepted 1,000 kids and say, okay, overall, how many kids applied test optional? If they say 30%, 40%, that's normal. And you look at if they accepted 1,000 kids and you ask them how many of those kids were test optional, they didn't submit a test score, 30, 40%. So it's proportional, which means they really are not looking at it. So why they had to start bringing it back, I have no idea. Anyway.
So, I mean, for those students, maybe you look at test optional schools.
Yeah, that's what we do, right? And and the ones that, if they're test optional, just say, don't submit it. And I don't think it hurts them.
Here's a more interesting case. Student, their transcript looks good mix of A's and B's. They're not the top 5% of their class, but they did okay for themselves. But you look at kind of the rest of the student, and there's not all too much going on with them. They're not a huge
we call them the
direction.
vanilla student. It's like they're a good kid. They're not causing trouble in school. Maybe they did like 1 or 2 like volunteer organization stuff. Nothing kind of off the chart. Nothing really interesting or very specific to them. They're not a bad student.
Yep.
They're not excelling at anything. They're not super passionate about anything. They're kind of vanilla, and they have to find a fit for them somewhere What do they do? How do they do that?
You know, my favorite flavor is vanilla, so
Great. All yours.
no, those are hard. And I guess those are the ones with no momentum that I talked about
Yeah.
before, where it's like, okay, they're not stupid. Obviously, they are capable. They're fully capable of doing, but they're just not motivated to do anything. Well, you just have to kind of suffer through whatever it is that they have and present their, what they have the best they can. But they have to be selective about the schools that they're going for. And so, I think, there are plenty of those kinds of kids that do, but I think they don't. If you have a wise counselor that will, hopefully control their list so that they're not reaching for everything, but they reach for a few, and then for the most part, they go for the schools that are about right for them.
And your counselor probably knows the best, given that they've had those years of experience there.
You would hope.
They have frames of reference, at least. I think that's the hardest thing for
Yeah.
high schoolers.
This conversation is really making me remember that you need to keep track of your GPA early on. Like, you really can't fiddle with those numbers. And when I was in, especially also when I was in college, it's like you would sit and do the math to see, like, you submit an assignment or take an exam and see like how lower your grade will go depending on how awful this one exam
make the
goes.
spreadsheet.
Yeah, you put in the calculators. There are weighted calculators online. You do it, but you always notice that it's way harder to bring something up like 1% versus going down like 10 or 12.
Yeah.
So
Unless you're getting a 0.3 GPA, then it's a lot easier.
then
to
it's
bring
a
it
lot
up.
easier to go up. And
Bell curve.
every push is a strong push up if you're that low. So it's if you're it's just in good, keep stay in good terms with yourself
Yeah.
and your counselor and your school. Just you don't have to push yourself to the point where you're going to break, but take care of your GPA. It's not coming back after a while.
There's a fun thing at Brown where we only have A, B, C, D, no plus minuses, so it's very hard cutoffs. And also, they don't calculate a GPA. They don't believe in a GPA. That's what they say. That's their whole pedagogic thing, their whole educational ideal thing. Grad schools care.
Yeah, they care a lot.
So I had to figure that stuff out on my own. I was in COVID. I remember I was in my room because we were back home, and I was like, wait a second. There is a number. They're just not going to tell me, and they're never going to tell me. So I have to figure it out myself. Made the spreadsheet, et cetera, et cetera. Keep an eye on it.
Yep.
Stay at top of B's at least. So give yourself something to work on.
Yeah, but I also say that, the one thing that sticks with you until the day you retire, if you're looking for jobs, like you're putting your application into your employer, they always ask for your undergrad. I'm like, when's the last time? I graduated like almost 40 years ago. They still want my GPA from my undergrad. No one asks for my high school, though.
Something that you might have a little more specialty with, you were a coach, the athlete. Do you think they approach the college application a little differently?
I mean, if they're a recruited athlete, it's totally different.
Completely different
Completely different, yeah. And so if you're recruited, then really your numbers are not that as important. You just have to be within the bucket of the school. So if you're looking at a top school, then you have to be a top student, but you don't have to be top. So you can be.
You got to be the bottom of the bucket
Yeah,
of
you
the
could be.
top.
Yeah, as long as you're in the bucket
Somewhere.
Right. If you're out of the bucket, then no matter how good you are at the sport, for those schools, they will not accept you because ultimately it's the admissions office that makes the final decision on it. Now, if you're a D1 athlete, which in Korea there are just not very many of them, and you're going for Stanford or Duke, then even if you have a 2.3, chances are if you're a superstar like basketball player because you're 6'9" and you can do a 360 dunk, you'll probably get in. But if you want that, if you want to go to Princeton, no, it's not going to happen.
Now, what about student athlete emphasis student?
Yeah. So let's say D3s and Ivy League D1 types of schools where they are looking at student first, at least up to a certain level, and then you have to be an athlete that the coach wants. And if they are and they're being recruited, then it's a totally different, right? So you get you can do a pre-read, you can do get your application done, and they can already pre-approve of your admission before you actually apply, and then you get the letter real quick, and then you're in. Very few kids experience that, and unfortunately, there are I don't know, it's unfortunate, but I know kids who have done that, who I know that, we've had some in the past at SFS where, if they're recruited athletes, that they're thought of as less or lesser because they didn't deserve getting into a specific school. I'm like, oh my gosh, if you knew the amount of work that they had to do in order to get recruited, you would not say that. That's just a slap in their face, like all the work and all the dedication they had to put into in order to get to that level so that the coach would want. Yeah. Unfortunately, most of the kids I work with are somewhere right in between, right? They're not, are they really wanted by coaches? Maybe certain ones, maybe some of the lower ones, but the top ones, top schools are competitive in most sports, unfortunately. And probably because all the smart kids who are athletes want to go there, and how many smart kids are also great athletes, right? So and bring all together, and we have a few schools that they all go for. And so it is competitive still. But I think for those kinds of kids, I think it's a fine line. Like, so I always have to ask them, like, okay, do you want to go to a slightly less, prestigious school to play the sport if you have a chance? Or you get into a more prestigious school, but you can't play. Which would you rather choose? And this is where I separate an athlete from a student, right? And usually they're pretty clear, yes, this or that. If it's this, then then there's a lot of work. Like, you email everybody.
A lot of cold emailing.
100, I usually recommend 100.
Yeah.
100 coaches, 100 schools, just,
So this is for a student who wants to play.
yeah, wants to play. And then if they don't, then you kind of do a little bit of both. So let's say, like, let's see if you could get an offer, and then maybe that'll change your mind in terms of, like, do you really want to play or not, right? And then apply to the schools that they want because, they like the school for its academics. So
Do you have any thoughts on art students?
art students, I think there are I guess, I don't know what the actual proportion would be, but I would say more than half the kids these days seem to be going away from just the pure art design schools. They're going for more universities with those kinds of programs in it, which makes it a little bit more difficult to get into, even if they're good art students, because there are certain schools that look at the type of GPA and SAT scores that you have before they consider your portfolio. If you go to a pure art design school, they're looking at your portfolio 100%, pretty much 95%, and that's it. And if, as long as you pass your classes, then chances are, if your portfolio, your art is good enough, then you get in. So there's not much to talk about that other than, their portfolio, that's where they spend most of their time. I know they go crazy over it to meet the requirements of every school, which every school is a little bit different depending on what it is that they're trying to major in. And then universities are, they're not easy.
So you got to be a good student first before you're a good artist to be considered even for your
So
portfolio.
certain programs like let's say Ivy League Fine Arts, BFAs, those are unless you got to be in the bucket, but you can't just be at the bottom of the bucket. You got to be just in, like, smack in the middle of the bucket
You gotta be
at the
swimming.
top. Yeah. So you got to be that kind of a student and then be an amazing artist. Like, that's really, really hard.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, I haven't had very many get in. I had one get in a couple of years ago, but it's probably it in my whole career. And then there are schools like University of Michigan and Carnegie Mellon where if you're into design, it's like they see a little bit of both. So I've seen slightly weaker kids get into those kinds of programs based upon their portfolio and vice versa. And then you have the pure art design schools that they just look at portfolio and nothing else.
So I was gonna ask about, like, those top exceptional students, but they're gonna be fine. They kind of know what they're doing. I want to ask about maybe kind of the what they should avoid, the pitfalls you see about students who are in maybe that top 5% who are aiming for highest colleges. What do you see as their downfalls?
Like, what are mistakes they can make?
Have made.
In terms of creating a list,
Lists, like applications, writing essays, getting recommendations, any part of that process.
yeah, I don't know if I can actually distinguish between the top students and sort of top students. I think they're all deserving. Like, I'd say 60-70% of all the kids I've ever worked with at SFS, or Singapore American, You drop them off at any Ivy League school, they'll do just fine. So are they deserving of it? That's a subjective word. I don't know, right? Yes, I'll say yes. They can handle it. They're more than smart enough. Unfortunately, it's just only top 5% of the best students in the entire world get in. So, and then of course among that there are some athletes who are not the top 5%, but they get in, and then legacy kids and stuff. So it really is less than 5%, right? So I guess I don't know if there's a difference. I think the biggest issue I have is just they overreach because they all want the same schools, and the problem is that some of them they don't belong there. I think schools like Brown, for example, right? I say that there are many kids who just wouldn't belong there, not because they're not smart enough, but because it's the wrong culture. I don't think. It's pretty liberal. It's
Right, it's an issue of fit again.
Yeah, and it's just the wrong place. Yet it's got the name, so they want it, right? And there's certain kids who just say, okay, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, that's it. That's all I have. No, I don't.
You can be the top one in the world, and that's not enough.
Or I can't see you on that campus.
No, yeah. There's certain kids who say MIT. I'm so excited about MIT. Really? No, no knock on MIT. There's plenty of good things that are happening, obviously for the right reasons. But there's certain kids who just don't belong there yet. That's what they go for, and those are the mistakes. And then if they come in with a list of 10 reaches, like straight out reaches, there's a problem, and there's a psychological damage that comes from the denial letters, rejection letters that they get. I don't know if you've experienced any of them. If the first one
we had very privileged cycles.
We did, yeah. We didn't have to read a lot of those, but
the first one hurts. Second one is you're down and somebody
they
punches
just keep
you.
going.
Yeah.
They just keep going.
And then if you have 10 of them, 11 of them, can you imagine what kind of you have nothing left? Oh, how are you going to go to college now? I'm a loser. I only got into this school, so I'm going to go, and it's not good.
And that's where the social emotional counseling of your education comes into play.
Yeah. Now, as an independent consultant, it's a little different. I feel like maybe I can be a little bit more aggressive because we need to get results, but it's not the best thing.
So you gotta the smart kids. The smart thing to do is keep an open mind. Not look at just the top schools at the top part of the U.S. News ranking, but really look for places that might work for who you are, like what you want to do, places you can live for 4 years, like we've talked about before, to have those considerations and be open to altering your list as you talk to your counselor.
Questions I have for a former high school counselor. Every year I feel like the students, or maybe it comes from the parents, rumors come out about certain schools are willing to take more I went to a Korean international school. X school is very amenable to more early decision Korean students. Are there any water to those rumors? No. Yep. Every year they pop up.
It's different. There's so many different types of rumors that just float around all the time. This school is blacklisted by that school, so don't apply. No, there's no such thing. It doesn't happen. They don't like these students because we haven't had one in however many years. Okay, again, we're less than 5% of the best kids in the entire world. They're all going to the same school or aiming for the same school. Is it possible just statistically, for a few years?
So now let's talk about what you're pivoting to your new stage of your career. You're doing college admissions consulting. We do a little bit. I think we primarily work in the standardized testing area of it, but you're kind of in the other section of it where it comes to getting to know a student, helping them make a list, helping them write essays, helping them kind of build a narrative. And I think especially, I've read your website, you really care about getting to know the student and really helping them discover themselves throughout what can be the most stressful and tense period of their lives so far. So in your view, what is a college admissions consultant? What should they do and what do you do?
It's all experience. It's all exposure to the admissions world and talking to admissions people year after year, because it's such a dynamic thing. It changes every year. Whatever was true last year is not true this year anymore.
You went through COVID.
Yeah, stuff like that. But even without COVID, just from year to year, like, well, how does that change from that admission rate to this year? Like, it's not possible, but it happens all the time. And so you got to stay updated. I don't know what they do, because most of the colleges, they don't actually deal with consultants directly. So it's hard for them to get specific. And the reason that I went to the conference, like, in Jeju last, up until yesterday, was just for networking. I didn't enter any sessions, any of the courses that they were offering. I just went there to mingle with the college admissions people because I have a relationship with them, because I've been doing it for so long. And I try to keep that up, and I sneak my emails into their newsletter, their listserv, so that I get the updates and things.
And how do you do it?
Yeah. How do I do it? I think what my website basically says is exactly what I do. I don't create anything. I don't manipulate anything. I don't manufacture anything. I just want to know who the student is. And this is something that I guess I used to try to do with kids in a school setting, but they're like, I had at least 40 kids, and it's 2 or 3 grades, so it'd be like 120, 130 kids that I would have to get to know. That's a lot of kids, and with 24 hours in a day. So now I have 10 kids. Basically, my capacity is 10, so I'm trying to keep it 10 or less. Can I get to know 10 kids? Pretty well, yeah, if I have the time. And so in 11th grade, that's what I try to do. Is just, and my background is just counseling in general. I once thought of, I actually got all the coursework to become a therapist outside of schools, and I didn't go through with it because I liked schools too much and I didn't want to leave it. And so ultimately I stayed with it, but I have very much interest in that. And so I try to have conversations with kids to talk to them about all of their insecurities and weaknesses and strengths and their desires and their background, possible trauma that they may have experienced in the past, so that I get to know them just like I used to, as a school counselor, but even to more depth, and then have them try to journal if they don't, and just start that process early, like in 11th grade or even 10th grade. And then second half of 11th grade, and you start to, give them homework about schools and research about, about those kinds of schools. Liberal arts schools, how about that? Like, with your personality, the fact that you like to talk all the time, I think liberal arts school is the way to go, right? You've never heard of one? Well, how about this one and that one? Research, see if you're interested, right? And so at least in my vision, I'm hoping that they can experience 100 schools. Talk to alum, do a day in a life, do whatever, Reddit, Quora. YouTube. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. And then visit if you can, and things like that. And so do all those things. And then, during summer, you start to work on actual essays. A lot of times, if you've done all the stuff before, chances are it won't take that long. But you get to the technical aspects of all that. And then when the supplementals come out in August and school starts, then you have to worry about those, applications, the details in general. And so, yeah, that's the kind of process that I have. And really, I'm not trying to manufacture anything. And then at the same time, extracurricular activity stuff, those are more motivational stuff, and saying, okay, what are you really interested? What are you really interested in studying? Okay, you've kind of gotten your appetite whet through that. Let's see if you can do a little bit more. Can you take a course? Let's see if you can find an internship. You have any connections with your parents? So many parents have so many connections. Most kids seem to get some sort of internship if they're really interested. That's a great extracurricular activity.
It sounds like anyone can benefit from this, but is there maybe a type of student that might be able to benefit most from a college admissions counselor?
I mean, I think, the question, and I guess the part I struggle with most is this is what I kind of used to do for free. If you pay tuition, this is what you basically pay for. I just don't get this in depth with them. At the same time, if you have a competent school counselor, do you really need a consultant? Maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot. No, I don't think so. Right? But if you don't, right, Or if you're not getting enough, and that's the part that I think parents want, is that somebody one-on-one, or they're paying extra for, that will give their child a little bit extra attention to support them in the process. Yeah. Can anybody benefit from that? Sure. Do all kids need it? No. Are there certain kids that need it a little bit more? Yeah. There are kids who just don't do anything. I'm working with one kid who just, like, getting him to write one sentence is a struggle. Right? So it's a different kind of kid, but I mean, those are, how would he do if there was no me? Ooh, I have no idea. Yes, he needs one. And he was the first one. His mom was the first one to sign up. There are kids, how about the top kids that are looking to see if they can gain a little bit of an edge so that instead of it being 5%, maybe they can go up to 7.5%. Could I help with that? I think I can.
And that's from all your experience.
Yeah, just from experience. And then there's certain, I think, for me to say that I can predict who gets in, who doesn't get into a specific school, that would be overstepping, my abilities. But do I have a better idea than most? I think so.
Do you sit down at the end of each year and you look at where students go to where?
For sure.
You kind of, most of the time,
Yeah.
you already kind of know.
Yeah.
That's the kind of, I think, intangibles that a 2-3 decade counselor can
honestly, I've been doing this for over 2 decades. I want to say it's the last 2-3 years that I feel like, there's something else that I feel like I know. So I can't explain that. I can't really describe it. I can't quantify it in any way. But
It's just experience.
that's just the way I feel. And so, yes.
And where can they find you?
We should have made a poster or something.
MyongConsulting.com.
MyongConsulting.com.
MYONG
June will have all
Consulting.com.
of
The links will be
links
there.
below.
We'll have his old bio. We'll have everything you need. If you want another college consultant, you want
Make
that
it
little
very
edge,
easy.
you want that help.
I did bring my business card, but I don't think it's going to help either.
And all of it will be down below. June will do the
Exactly.
work. Yep.
Yep. So for SATs, for everything else,
Mr. Rue.
I think Mr. Myong can help you with that. And that will be all for today's episode of TheHagwon After Hours. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for all your knowledge and wisdom and experience that surely we do not have.
Not yet.
Not yet. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah,
Bye, y'all.
thank you. That was fun.
Okay. Nice.